welcome everyone. Hopefully most of you are joining us from the opening session that just ended. As I said in the chat, I really hope you all had the chance to take a bio break and get a hot or cold beverage, which is what I did during that time. But we're so pleased to see all of you here for our first full session, I guess, because the opening was a session, but our first content session of ShiftED, the summer summit, which you're all attending at the moment. So I'm going to stop talking because apparently I can't keep from babbling at the moment. So I'm just going to pass it off to our amazing panelists for this session. So we have Louise Sandhaus and Briar Levit and Brockett Horne. And I've been told special guests are on their way, but they're going to join us and talk about all sorts of really amazing things that have to do with the work that they've been doing. So Louise, why don't you go ahead and get started?
Cool. I think, Ryan, did you want to jump in first?
Sure. I will be here today as well, serving as the community moderator. So I'll introduce myself briefly. I'm Ryan Gibboney, and I'm coming from Central Pennsylvania at Juniata College, where I serve as a design educator and social designer and community revitalization nonprofit founder. So hopefully I'll connect with many of you this week. And I know this week we'll have lots of information sharing, our social mixers and happy hours, but I wanted to thank you all for a huge virtual hug. I think we could all use one at this point as we prepare to start up with our fall semester. So to briefly introduce our panelists today, I asked them to share just some quick information with me. Briar is coming from Portland State University, where she is Associate Professor of Graphic Design. She studied Russian in college along with design and remains very interested in Russian language, culture, and design. So a fun fact. Brockett is joining us as a design educator, designer, and writer based in Baltimore, Maryland at MICA. There she teaches fierce sophomores and daring juniors, and her creative work encourages users to examine how they are looking and interacting. And last but not least, Louise is joining us from Cal Arts, where she is the spawn of two commercial artists. And as a child, her dad left a secure job as an art director for General Electric to start a silkscreen greeting card company with his pal Joe. So some fun facts that you may or may not have known about our panelists. As I mentioned, I will be here to help moderate the chat and keep us on track time-wise. And hopefully we can stimulate some lively conversation after they share their presentation. And the last thing I wanted to mention, they will be talking primarily about the People's Graphic Design Archive today. I will share some links out about that as well, just in case if those are things that you are not familiar with. It's a very awesome passion project. So please, panelists, take it away.
Thank you. Ryan, Lisa, Alberto, thank you. Thank you to AIGA-DEC. It's really great to be part of ShiftED. It was remarkable last year that this got up and running so quickly, and it's great now to see it continue. You know, I think the introductions, Lisa in particular, you, David, getting us off to the right foot, you know, about how much the conversation has shifted. So again, I'm Louise Sandhaus, and joining me are my fabulous People's Graphic Design Archive co-directors, Brockett Horne. Brockett, you want to wave? And Briar Levit, wave. We're going to have special guests join us. Tony Best, who unfortunately couldn't be here, will have a pre-recorded part of the presentation. And he is a visual arts and information archivist. He's currently working at the Film and Television Archive Academy. And Kate Long. Kate, you want to join us? Who's the librarian at Letterform Archive. So yeah, and it's great to see all these faces today. I'm going to start sharing. Okay, and if my team can just tell me if we're seeing the presentation.
It looks great.
Okay, fantastic. Let's get started. So just to give you an overview, here's what we're going to cover today. We'll describe what we see as the design history emergency, and that, of course, is the name of the presentation. We are going to do a brief walkthrough of the People's Graphic Design Archive, otherwise known as PGDA, so you might hear that term. And we'll talk about what the People's Graphic Design Archive is, what it includes, and how it works. We'll share a couple of case studies of educators documenting design history in their own communities. And next will be the 3 mini lessons. So we are going to have a good section of this presentation that hopefully provides some very practical information and how-tos on how to address this design history emergency. So how to locate vulnerable missing history, about conducting oral histories, and then documenting work. And finally, we'll show you how to add your work, add your documentation to the PGDA. It's really easy, and hopefully you'll feel very confident. And at the end, we'll have plenty of time for discussion and Q&A. So to begin, what is this design history emergency? I think we probably all could guess, but let me begin with a personal backstory. So as some of you may know, in 2014, this book came out that I had spent many years researching to see how California graphic design might be distinct from a European and East Coast design lineage. In doing the research for the book, I came across unbelievable material and people and stories about graphic design history. And I knew that there was so much more out there, designers who had been overlooked in our graphic design history, particularly people of color, indigenous people, and women, often because their work wasn't recognized as graphic design. One of the things that I saw when doing my research was the AIGA Los Angeles chapter archive. When I did locate it, I discovered that 2 weeks earlier, it had been dumped. All this history was gone. And I mourned the loss of the stories from those designers whose work may have been in that archive and no longer with us, and the stories of so many others that have passed. These stories from the proverbial horse's mouth tell us about what their lives as designers were like, about the work they created, and about the context in which they were working. We know there is a bigger and more complex graphic design history that we urgently need to discover and preserve before more of it is lost. I began to fantasize at that moment a way to save this history. First, I imagined people not just as passive consumers of the canonical narrative, like this one that we all know, but as researchers and contributors to our history. I also imagined, what if there was a virtual archive where anyone could add their research so it could be shared and preserved? The emergency is that urgently, again, we need to identify the missing contributors to design history who are more advanced in years and capture their stories before, and their work before important contributions are lost. We can become citizen scholars. Educators working with students can document these missing stories in our local communities before it's too late. Best of all, it can be preserved and shared on the People's Graphic Design Archive. So we hope this presentation will inspire you, provide models, and help prepare you. I'm going to turn this presentation over to Brockett Horne to introduce you to the archive.
Hi, thanks so much for joining today. I think the best way actually to introduce what the archive is, what it includes, and how it works is to play our promo video. So Louise, do you mind to cue that up?
Maybe. Here we go.
Graphic design history has a problem. Much of it is either ending up in dumpsters or going unrecognized because it doesn't fit into the established canon or idea of what graphic design is. Without the proper archives and a diversity of materials and voices, much of graphic design history will disappear. But we have a solution. The People's Graphic Design Archive, a digital archive by everyone, about everyone, for everyone. This archive is different. The People's Graphic Design Archive includes not just finished products, but process, photos, videos, letters, documents, oral histories, anecdotes, articles, essays, and other writings. And best of all, it's created by us, the people. There are many types and combinations of visitors. They can browse or do a search for specific content. Entries feature subject, format, medium, designer, and date, along with other related information. Share, make sets, and leave comments if you have more to add to the story. The People's Graphic Design Archive is for research, education, inspiration, or just pure joy. We need your help to make the archive a reality. Join us in building the People's Graphic Design Archive.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. So the archive, thanks so much, Ryan, for putting the link to our website in Zoom chat, which will also take you directly to the archive itself. It's currently a living prototype, so it's kind of our first launch, and it's built in Notion, which some of you might know. It's a collaboration app, kind of similar to a wiki. Let's take a look. When you arrive at the site, you'll find categories that you can browse,
Here,
such as publications.
That. Sorry, Brockett. Here, let me restart that video. Here.
Awesome. Well, here's Notion. Thank you so much. You can see it when some of you might teach with this tool or know it, but you'll see the categories that you're able to browse by. And there are lots of great categories. You'll see information graphics, motion graphics, lots of others, or you can just scroll, which you can see here. And there is a multitude of content. There's almost 4,000 items in the archive, and I'm sure that some are being contributed while we're talking or even on this call. It goes on and on. There's a very long scroll. So the archive has many different types of projects or material. There are finished projects, design process, which is some of my favorite, photos, correspondence, interviews, articles, links to other archives, and all different kinds of media, including JPEGs, GIFs, PDFs, text files, videos, and audio. It's messy, and it's beautifully messy is the way I would describe it. Each item in the archive has a unique record with all sorts of important information, including, for example, we're looking at the Tank Girl title sequence. And each item has a title, which for our field is sometimes a little more challenging than you might think of compared to, say, an art object, which might be entitled by the maker or the owner. But anyway, we have a title, we have creators, we have date, description, we have related links, but maybe what's most important is tags. There are lots of tags, and tags can really help users find content really quickly and sort based on different categories or themes, could be relevant to your teaching or something you're reading about. Content comes from practically anywhere. Material is scanned, added, or it could be found from other archives and referenced. It could be just posted on the web. And the work represents everything from the known, the unknown, the overlooked, the forgotten, the strange, the wonderful, as long as it has to do with graphic design. And it has to be at least 10 years old, or it is about something that's at least 10 years old. We always cite the sources and provide as much information as we can. Louise, do you mind to bring me forward one more slide? I want to share a couple of my favorite items in the archive.
Okay, I did not do my job here, Brockett. So we are going to see these things that you talked about, and now we'll go to the favorite things.
I have trouble choosing. There's so many really good ones. But I tried to pick some that I thought would be relevant to our fellow educators, starting with, I think on the next slide, Louise. Here's one of my, yeah, this is good. This is good.
Yep.
Some of my favorites are motion graphics. There's a lot of very cool, like early motion graphics work. This is Alien Dreamtime Rave motion graphics from the 1990s. And Briar found this and uploaded it. So it's really cool to not just see the information, but also who uploaded it and maybe what they like about it or the description that they provide for it. Also, it's very cool indeed. I would agree with that. The next one is ramen noodle packaging. And I like this one because you could see how two different uploaders were kind of responding to each other. So someone uploaded a Korean version of ramen noodle packaging from the 1960s, and then somebody else responded to that with a Japanese version that predates it by 2 years. So that's kind of fun, where you can get objects that are related to each other and cross-reference things that are in the archive. And then the last example that I brought is stickers. And these were contributed by Morgan Searcy, who's an active member of our team. These are outrage stickers from 1991. You can see that they were reproduced on a standard laser printer. And that's kind of what I love about the archive. It has things that are modest and things that are bold and things that are brash, but things that we, the community, find to be important and valuable. So I'm going to pass it over to Briar with that.
All right. So hello, I'm going to share some case studies of good or great examples of student graphic design history research. So the first one is was done by my colleague, Melissa Delzio, who I think is here in the audience. And Melissa is an independent designer and educator who has been researching the history of graphic design, the history of the graphic design community in Portland for over 7 years, starting with a collection of materials she received from a Portland designer she met at a local event. And she has shared and disseminated the artifacts and her further research in various ways over that time. Most recently, and this was winter 2020, she created a class at Portland State University, where we both teach, called Portland Design History, to help students get hands-on experience in research and writing about design history. Students chose from a group of subjects that Delzio had a bit of material on. They took these leads and continued with their own original research. Students conducted interviews, they looked in local archives and libraries, and of course, they hit the digital trail. So here is an image of students looking at some materials, and you can see this material on the website. Actually, Melissa, would you mind popping that web URL in the chat, if you don't mind? I see you there in the chat. Next slide, please, Louise. The result was this beautiful illustrated book with essays by the students and Melissa covering 20 Portland designers. So it's this incredible document that we now have. Also, go ahead to the next slide. The material is also available online at portlanddesignhistory.com with category search capability. And this GIF is a feature about Portland Black queer comic artist and editorial designer Rupert Kennard by student Fahad Marakai, or I think Meraki, I think is the pronunciation. So this is just one feature. And there are a number, and Melissa just told me that she just uploaded another history recently. The site is beautiful. There's loads of material on there. And of course, it's going to continually develop. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So in the fall
I think you want this one, is that right, Briar?
yeah, sorry.
Okay, okay.
In the fall of 2021, Associate Professor Brigitte David utilized the People's Graphic Design Archive to engage her students in research as well. Students were given a chance to look at the archive for inspiration and choose a subject to continue their research. Lillian Schallenberger chose to investigate the work of Alan Bell, the founder and designer of Black Magazine, a publication for a queer Black audience out of Los Angeles. She couldn't find many images of Bell himself, which prompted her to reach out and request an interview. Bell said yes, and the result was an in-depth interview in which he discussed everything from his childhood introduction to metal type, to his goals as a publisher and designer, to his ongoing activism for the Black gay community. And so this is just an excerpt from that interview, which you can find on the archive now. In addition to the interview, Bell donated a complete collection of Black Magazine to Edinburgh University's archives. Next steps, which we are working on, are getting some students to upload those issues to the People's Graphic Design Archive so everyone has access.
So next, we're going to share the heart of this presentation, our 3 mini lessons, so that collectively, as a community, we can address the design emergency. Your participation is needed to identify missing history, capture it, and preserve it. The goal we want to mention is preservation, not perfection. So we need to save this material. Learning everything that we need to do to become professional researchers is going to be too late. So we're going to start with the first lesson by Brockett Horne.
Thanks, Louise. I'm particularly interested in collaborative methodologies. I'm curious how, if we recognize that history is vulnerable and it's missing, how can we find it? I think it's a perplexing kind of a question. So this first mini lesson tries to respond to that in a certain way. So if so much of design history is not included or overlooked, how can we learn to look differently? In Martha Scottford's essay, Messy History versus Neat History, she reminds us not to look for examples of design that are produced for large audiences, large institutions, or national audiences, things that are produced in great numbers or made by famous designers, but instead to look at messy history. And that's when design turns its back on mainstream cultural codes. This kind of design might be produced for small enterprises, expressing personal ideas, made for specialized audiences, organized around family life, or created for local causes, which is kind of what we're gonna ask you to think about in this next bit. Louise, can you send me forward a slide? Yeah, so here's an example of messy history that could be produced for small enterprises. This is Brenda Laurel's amazing work for Purple Moon, series of products to help girls get excited about games and technology at a time when there weren't products to do that, from the 90s. And the next slide is AIGA's own Rick Griffith. This is his a project expressing his personal ideas and also his personal working methodology with a Buy Nothing poster from 2003. Or Liz, will you send me forward one more slide? Thank you. Or this recruitment poster for the Lesbian Avengers from the 1980s is an example of speaking to a very specialized rather than a general audience. Or design that's organized around family life or family preferences, like these personalized holiday cards by Langston Hughes for Christmas 1950. And then we wanted you today to kind of think a little bit about what communities you belong to. What communities are you a part of that you feel like aren't represented in design history? Here's some geographic communities. Here's a publication for San Diego in 1974 called the San Diego Door. It was contributed by Jeff Kaplan to our archive. Or we have things that have been created for local causes, like this beautiful, unique pillow sham from Tuskegee, Alabama, that was created for the famed Flyers in the 40s. Or another publication for a Texas-based publication called The Rag, also from the 1970s. Or I think finally, here's an example of a design intervention. This is the Repo History Project from the 1980s that created signage to identify things that had happened in New York City. So with that, I want to ask you to participate in this in the spirit of collaboration. And given that we are a crowdsourced archive, I want to try a crowdsourced project. I was hoping that we could collectively try brainstorming some possible research topics using a Figma Jamboard. And this is something I've never done, so be gentle with me. Let me post a link to the Figma Jamboard in Zoom chat, and I'll kind of guide you through it. I'm hoping that we can work collectively to identify some overlooked areas. So this Figma Jamboard has 3 questions, and Ryan, I'm going to call on you to help moderate. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for I made a cute short link, but there's a hot link. Thank you for that. Louise, do you mind to send us forward one more slide?
Sure.
And play that short video. Cool.
What's going on here? Hello. Let's see what's going on here. There we go.
Oh, cool. That's great. Okay. So first, I ask you to respect the ideas of other collaborators in this experiment. But there are 3 questions in this Figma Jamboard, and the instructions are on the left. So respond to any of the 3 questions simply by adding a Post-it note. You can see the 3 questions. Number 1, what aspects of graphic design history in your community are already known about? So maybe it would be helpful to identify some things that are well researched, are published. There's a lot of publishing about them. And then second, what's missing? And then finally, how might you identify and find those who made this missing work, which allows us to kind of get at some methodologies. Should be easy to click and drag the Post-it notes and just type in your responses. Unfortunately, you have to have a Figma account to participate. And if you're not using it as a teaching tool, maybe you want to try it. What have you got to lose? It's just a quick exercise or activity. And if you prefer to just watch, you can do that without signing up, but you do have to have an account to participate, but you can still watch otherwise. So we were going to try this ambitious thing of Louise broadcasting what's happening on the Figma Jamboard. Let's see if it can work.
All right.
If you have any questions,
hey,
oh, wow.
Look at this.
It's beautiful.
What fun.
If you have any technical questions, you can message me on Zoom chat or just let us know. But let's spend 3 or 4 minutes just to kind of see what we've got. And then Ryan, maybe you could help me just comment on some of these things. But what we're hoping you'll do is add Post-it notes in a way that responds to these questions.
This is so much fun. It's so great to see. I love the little like moving flags here of people's names.
I don't know, I noticed in the introductory session that there was interest in using Miro. So I think that's another good like collaborative teaching tool if you're sort of new to this space. But I've personally been experimenting with whiteboard kinds of tools when teaching during the pandemic, as I'm sure that you have. It's easy to zoom in and out of this file too. It's just plus is to zoom in, and then your space bar will give you a pan, the option to pan.
You know, what I love about seeing this and the challenge is like, you know, what do we not know? But I think that what's interesting and exciting here is that working together to help inspire and generate ideas about where we might look for history that might be missing. So if we get first what we know, then begin to think about what we might have forgotten.
So far, I'm kind of excited about some of the things that are popping up so far, because one of the things I think about often when researching design history is we often lean so heavily on the people that made it, right? So we have this kind of history of design heroes, and so much of the existing design history comes from looking at designers, right? And biographical research and images that kind of lean on the body of work of one particular person who's well known. So it's exciting to me that you guys are talking about things in your local communities. So music posters, furniture design, advertising, sports product advertising. And some of these are industries that I didn't even know were in those geographic locations or those geographic areas. It's kind of cool to see. I'm learning a lot just by watching this very chaotic process.
Yeah, you know, I was talking to our local bookshop owner, and he was talking about how in the 70s, his dad was making flyers about community events. And I thought, wow, this is like really interesting information. And he actually used the term graphic design. So I'm thinking, oh, maybe dad got creative with these flyers. Now, I have to say there are many communities that are here. And so I'm thinking, well, how do I figure out in what ways that this community was being communicated to or may have made communications?
This,
Brockett, if it's okay for me to jump in now.
yeah, I want to make one comment then I'd love to, I can see where if we need more space too, that's a great problem. We need bigger boats already to talk about this, which is great.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I'm convinced that collaboration is the way forward. You know, I know there is something chaotic about watching this process, although you guys are all designers, so everybody's like orienting their Post-it notes in a grid, which wasn't even part of the exercise, but it's emerging.
I know, we go for grids, don't we? Yeah.
But I was going to say, like, I'm really convinced that collaboration is the best way to try to identify new opportunities for research. And I'm really, really excited to collaborate with y'all on this call and AIJ DEC for bringing opportunities for sharing ideas. It's really, in my view, like that's the best way for us to find innovative ways of working. Can you make any sense of this, Ryan? Do you see anything that strikes you?
Yeah, so I just wanted to mention some of my recent experience in the spring semester. I am in a very small institution. We only have 1,400 students, and I'm the only design faculty member here. And I reached out to a history professor who had some students working on a book about local railroad history in this area, and that we have one of the only small gauge railroads that is still active. And immediately, you know, let's design a book. And it ended up being a documentary film and a whole bunch of other really great stuff. But I just want to mention to everyone that this exercise, even if it's the start of the semester and we're all trying to identify if you work with community partners or you don't, this is a great way to get students inspired to do this type of work. I do a lot of community engagement work, so this is very relevant to my classroom. But for those of you that may not, I think it's still an important part of our classroom activity, whether you're teaching all in person or in a high flex model. And Brockett, to answer your question, I don't know if I can make sense of this on the fly because it's like electric still moving around, but I am seeing a lot that has to do with everything from indigenous cultures in that area to Nike and Steelcase and Herman Miller. So I think depending on where you all are located, and as I just mentioned, you know, this local, whether it's creating an oral history with a video or creating a published history in the format of a book, it really creates a positive. My student evaluations from the spring were the sweetest things I've ever read in my life. And that to me is what our jobs are all about. If you're in the classroom and you want the students to have this engaged environment, this is really an important part of that process.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. We've got 2 other mini lessons like in this session, so I don't want to take up too much time. I'm going to pass it back over to you, Louise.
Okay, this is, again, thank you everybody to participating. It's really exciting. I just want to say like one thing, and I was also speaking with Alberto and other educators. Like this work is not easy, and this is kind of like, this exercise is really helping to prime the pump. So if we're going to save these missing histories, it's often like strings of conversation. You find out about one person who might know about something, and you speak to that person, and they lead you to somebody else, who leads you to somebody else, who leads you to somebody else, and then you hit gold, and it's amazing. And again, we hope, you know, in order to do these books and do this research, what is important to happen is to add this stuff to the People's Graphic Design Archive so that it is preserved and can be found by others who may be, this may be relevant to their own research. So next, we are going to go to this pre-recorded mini lesson, Capturing the Stories, Community Efforts for Documenting Oral Histories with Tony Best. There's a lot of very practical information. So we hope you find people who made things in your community that should be part of graphic design history. What do you need to know in order to do an oral history? So you might want to get out your notepad and either your digital one or your physical one and take some notes because there's a lot of information.
My name is Tony Best, and welcome to Capturing the Stories, Community Efforts for Documenting Oral Histories. This presentation will explore options for citizen scholars to record design history in an oral history format. For the purposes of this session, I'll outline strategies for conducting emergency, low-threshold oral history interviews with limited preparation in advance. This will also serve as a primer for citizen scholars that have little to no interview experience. Now, please note that this presentation will cover workflows for in-person oral history interviews and will adhere to current COVID safety guidelines. Before we get started, I'd like to provide a conceptual overview of oral history as described by the Oral History Association. Oral history is distinguished from other forms of interviews by its content and extent. Oral history interviews seek an in-depth account of personal experience and reflections, with sufficient time allowed for the narrators, i.e. interviewees, to give their story the fullness they desire. The content of oral history interviews is grounded in reflections on the past as opposed to commentary on purely contemporary events. I'd like to add that an interview becomes an oral history when it's recorded, preserved, and made accessible in a repository. In the case of the PGDA, oral histories not only serve as historical documents, but as their own archival artifacts within the collection. Let's move on to phase 1 of emergency oral history documentation, which is having the essentials to be prepared to conduct the interview. First is question development. Given that you've identified your interviewee, there's likely extremely limited time for extensive research. Ideally, some familiarity with the interviewee's work or online research is helpful. That way you can construct a more detailed timeline to help you develop your questions. If you don't have the luxury to do this research, you can develop a general timeline question format. I find that asking questions in a chronological order assists the interviewee with remembering details about their life and their work. While there isn't a specific oral history template for questions, consider this timeline order. Begin with their early life, segue into their education and training, if that's applicable, then move into the chronology of their career, then cover their craft and technique of their work, and then close with reflections of their life and their work. Because oral histories draw from personal experiences and the interviewee is essentially narrating their own story, avoid asking yes or no questions. Ask open-ended questions that elicit rich answers and will allow them to color their own accounts of their story. So for example, here's a list of questions that I usually ask when conducting an oral history. And in consideration of emergency oral histories, it's also advisable to keep a question template in a cloud-based server like a Google Drive, etc., or Dropbox for instant access if you're on the go. Equipment. Smartphones are adequate for capturing emergency oral history interviews. Not only does the video record visual documentation, but the audio can be preserved for transcription purposes, which will be covered later in this presentation. It's also advisable for citizen scholars to have a charger and a tripod stand during a smartphone oral history session. And please be mindful of the smartphone's local storage capacity. You don't want an uh-oh moment and run out of space. Or if you can, enable cloud recording if you have that option. Releases. Dealing with releases and deed of gift forms can become cumbersome and complex when documenting oral history projects, but they're necessary. Without delving too much into the legalese aspect, releases essentially establish copyright ownership and govern what can be done with the oral history asset. For the purposes of community-based efforts, a simple basic release form will suffice that outlines the intent and purpose of the oral history, as seen in this example here. Templates can be found online and modified per your institutional needs. The release document should also be stored in a cloud service along with the question template for instant access. Let's consider an example in which a citizen scholar secures an impromptu in-person oral history session with a community-based graphic designer. I'll provide a general overview of suggested tips for pre-interview, conducting the interview, and post-interview protocol. First, in order to make the interviewee feel comfortable, bring a small token gift or light refreshments. That can be either a book from your school, bottled water, bagels, donuts, just something that will make them feel comfortable during the interview session. Next, explain and reiterate the purpose of the oral history so they have a clear understanding what they're participating in. Next, and probably the most important aspect of the pre-interview is to discuss and sign the release document. Definitely do that before you begin the interview session. Next, outline the amount of time expected to conduct the interview. Normally, you want to allot 1 to 2 hours, but it could be longer depending how comfortable the interviewee feels during the oral history. Then locate a quiet environment free of distractions and with little or minimal noise. And During this current time, you definitely want to maintain all COVID precautions, which entails safe distancing and masking, etc. The interview. Now, it's important to ask your open-ended questions and let the interviewee narrate their story and allow them to speak. Even if they go off on a tangent, that's fine, but still try to keep them on track because you want to capture their history and, most importantly, how their work ties into graphic design history, but allow them to freely flow and to express their story. Also take into account any recall or memory issues of interviewees that are of advanced age. If there's some uncertainty about factual events, if they get stuck on a question or they pause on something, move on for the best interest of time. And you can always fact check events at a later date. If an interviewee does have any visual materials that will aid them in recalling information, definitely allow them to include that during the oral history because that will recall their memory. And most importantly, you want to quote unquote fill the room. Don't be pushy. If you push the interviewee and you start to feel that they're becoming uncomfortable with certain questions, or you're asking too many personal questions, or you're going into an area that's, that they may not want to discuss, then just kind of fill them out. That's the best approach, which is common sense. After the interview, it's definitely important to ensure that your smartphone file has recorded properly. So you want to double check, scrub through it, make sure that the audio is fine, that the video is fine, and that there's not any kind of technical snafus. You want to also speak with the interviewee and reiterate the purpose of the interview, re-explain how it will be used, and go over the terms of the release form. And close with thanking the interviewee and definitely remind them of the importance of their contribution to the history of graphic design, of illustration, and to the field to which they've given their oral history for. And I'd also suggest that the interviewer takes field notes. So post-interview, after you wrap the interview up, while the interview is still fresh within your mind, jot down notes about observations that you made during the interview, the circumstances, possible follow-up questions. That's important to keep that in your on your own personal notes for follow-up and just as documentation for your oral history. Lastly, we'll take a look at repository preservation and interviewee follow-up. File management. Now, my motto as an archivist is better safe than sorry. So before uploading the oral history file to the destination repository, I strongly suggest doing a safety backup to another cloud-based server and also a physical hard drive as a safety backup. Data management is another animal unto itself that can be discussed in a whole other presentation. Transcript. Generating a transcript is important for keeping a text-based record of the interview. The three options listed here all have their pros and cons, but I recommend option 1. Even though it's more time-consuming, students can not only do the transcript, but they can also fact-check, which is something that an AI or pro service doesn't offer. Interviewee follow-up. Finally, it's imperative to follow up with a thank you to the interviewee and any other party that was involved in facilitating the interview. This is also a chance to address any concerns or ask for clarifications about questions that were asked during the interview. In conclusion, producing oral histories can involve a series of complex methodologies and workflows not covered in this presentation. but in the best interest of preserving emergency and urgent design oral history, I hope these tips can help. Thank you for your time.
And we thank Tony.
My name is Tony Best, and welcome to Capture.
We're not going to watch that again. We are going to move forward. So I hope everybody was able to hear it or read it. Sorry, we didn't realize the volume was so low. Now we know. So I think it was a lot of practical, common sense tips that that Tony offered. So next on our little mini lessons here, the third and last one will be about documenting work fast and easy with Kate Long. And again, Kate is the librarian for the Letterform archive that we know and love. So I'm going to turn this over to Kate.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. Let's see. So I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about how you can save histories on your phone and how you can organize that so you can find it later. So first things first, I wanted to,
sorry, Kate. Here we go.
Oh, you're good. We're great.
Okay.
This is a perfect place to be. When this first one here that we're going to look at, we're going to talk about some flat objects. So one thing I always recommend when you're looking at flat objects is to see if it's double-sided. So what we're talking about here is capturing context. When you're looking at an object, there's a lot more information about it than just the thing that first draws your eye. So if it's possible to get both sides of a double-sided object, you are often going to see, like, surprisingly, it is double-sided, or maybe there's a transcription or there's a printer's note on the back. You can get some additional information that might be useful to your research or worth preserving. So when capturing the context of flat objects, always look at both sides. And I want to give a shout out on this one to Mark Canesso. He's the type designer, graphic designer, and lettering artist behind Paperwork Studio and Type Lab. So he made this beautiful little piece you're looking at. So one of the reasons it's really important to capture context is because if you do only take a photo of the thing that caught your eye, when you need to reference it later, sometimes you don't have the information that you need. I'll sometimes get emails from people with an image that's something like this, and they're like, hey, I took this photo while I was at Letterform Archive. Do you happen to know where this came from? And by looking at it, I can tell that it's probably from a type specimen, but we have over 75,000 objects and thousands of those are type specimens. So without any additional information from the page that they found very interesting, it's extremely difficult to determine what that might be. So capturing that context is also helpful for you later. Louise, let's look at the next one. When you capture that close-up shot, that's really important for the details that you're trying to get. I recommend always also getting the full page of that object. So if I received an email with this page, I could tell from the page number that this is one of our larger type specimen books. I can also tell from the interior design, this one having a border, a lot of them don't have that. We talked a little bit about design detectives in the chat, and sometimes these clues can be very helpful, but what's best is that if you also take the cover photo, you'll be able to determine what that source is of the object. You get the cover of it, so you'll get some additional information, not just the title of it, but who it's by. And then I always also recommend taking a shot of the copyright page. In this example that I'm showing here, it's just the title page because some of the early type specimens we have are before copyright. So that additional information about where it was produced and what edition it might be isn't included in a copyright page because that doesn't exist. So in that case, take a shot of that title page. It'll have some vital information that will be useful for you later. Louise, let's do the next one. When we're looking at objects that have multiple pieces, it's really important to take pieces of each leaf if you're able, not just the front and the back of it like we did with that flat object in the first example. in this example here, it's a set of 6 postcards by Chen Design Associates. They're in Oakland. And I took a picture of the front, I took a picture of the back, and then a picture of each of the individual pieces. In my phone, I have them squared up like this, and then I also have each individual one of the postcards. You're always going to have, it's much better to have too much information in your phone than it is to not have enough. So if you can take a picture of every part of it, then I recommend definitely doing that. It's hard to like crop into this squared up piece to get the information on the small ones if you need to. So take a shot of every single leaf, front and back if you can. And then this middle image here, something I recommend if you're able to hold the object wherever you are, holding it in your hand, if it's a small enough object, can give you a sense of scale. Sometimes having these additional cues is useful for you later as well. And I think there's a question about organizing, which I'll answer in the next slide. One of the ways that I like to organize is using albums. And for today, I'm going to be talking about how to do that on an iPhone. Unfortunately, I didn't have access to an Android phone to also show you slides of that, but you can find tutorials online. I'm just using the native apps. So I use the camera to capture the images, and then the photos, which is that really colorful icon down on the bottom left there, that Photos app for all of my organizing. So what we're going to see here for how to do that is if you are looking in your Photos app at an individual selected image, there's the share icon, which is the one that I've circled down in the bottom left-hand corner. And that'll show you what is the next screen there. And the third option is add to album. And when you do that, you can choose to create a new album or to add to an album that you already have. One of the reasons that adding albums is really important is that, like the person, I think it was Gary in the channel was saying, like, this is inevitably just going to end up in a feed somewhere, and you're going to be like scrolling for 45 minutes trying to find the thing that you're looking for, past like all the pictures of your cat and every coffee you've ever had and that sort of thing. So I like to think about my photo albums as project folders or scrap folders, and I'll organize them by either object of the, by the single object. If I've taken every page, you can just have a folder that is that object and you can see it, or by theme. So sometimes we get researchers who are really interested in something that has, expressive type. And so you can have one that's just for expressive type, or a specific color, or a kind of style that you're interested in. Again, I think about them like project or scrap folders. So organize them however you need to be able to find it later. And you can put a single photo in multiple albums so that you don't have to remember like, oh, I put it in this, but it also makes sense for this other thing that I work on. Put it in both, like make it easy for yourself to find what you need to find. And lastly, on my next slide, you can also add captions, which can be really useful for your recall on what it was that was interesting to you. You can add any notes that you'd like. So in that same screen where we added to folder, or added to album, if you just scroll down slightly, it'll say add caption. And this is free text. You can type in any information that you want. Unfortunately, if you're searching later in the Photos app, the metadata is all auto-generated, so they won't catch anything that you've added here, which is another reason that it's really important to put these in albums, because it'll find your album, but it won't maybe find something that you added to a caption. And in the caption, I generally recommend adding the creator, the year, and anything you might know about the story of how it was made, where it was made, or why it was made. So in this example with the Chen Design Associates postcards that I was showing you, they created this for the Asian American Islander Desi American Heritage Month, and that was created this year. It was also printed by Full Circle Press, and then their letterpress printed. I included that they have a belly band and that they're printed with red, blue, and silver ink. So these are all things that if I can't quite tell from the photo, I've captured that information for myself here in this native app on my iPhone, so I don't have to download anything extra. And those are all of my best quick tips for how to save this information on your phone. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Briar.
Brockett might be wearing Briar's hat. Briar had a little crash problem.
I know, I think she's here.
Is she
Briar,
back?
here?
Yay, Briar. Okay. Are you good, Briar? Or should Brockett go ahead?
Okay, jump in, Briar, jump in at any point. I was going to talk, finally, the last thing really in this last little bit is just how to add this to the archive. We want to make sure that you can apply these practical tips. I'm so inspired by Tony and Kate's presentation, some really, really good instruction there. Also things we can use with our students. So I'm thinking about how to apply this in the classroom. But let me just walk through this last little bit with how you can add this to the archive. So Louise, do you mind to send us forward one slide? Excellent. So find the submit page, which is located on our website. And there is some information on our community guidelines. This is an area we hope to expand in the final site. Remember, the existing site is our living prototype. There were a couple questions about copyright. We hope to flush that out a lot more in the final version with more information. Fill out as much information as you know about the object that you're adding. There are fields that are required. Those are indicated by red arrows in this video that's playing. Tags are super important, and we feel like that's something that makes our archive unique and easy to use and search. And then you're done. It's pretty easy. Again, we're not interested in perfect photos. We're really just trying to preserve things. So preservation, not perfection, is sort of our motto you've heard a couple of times today. So, your submission will be live on our archive, generally in a day or two, maybe 48 hours. Your item will probably appear near the top, but if a lot of entries are being made, you might have to scroll down to see it or search for it because, as I mentioned, we're constantly adding content. These days, we're getting some cool uploads on the Olympics, so that's kind of fun to see. So share with us your design. I can't wait to expand this and collaborate with you on making a larger and more inclusive design history.
Great. Thanks, Brockett. So before we go to questions, we want to acknowledge and thank this incredible team, the team that's presented here today, but also our team that has been working on this and making this living prototype happen for the last few years. So of course, my co-directors, Brockett Horne and Briar Levit, and our social media manager, Morgan Searcy. And we also have generous supporters. And these supporters, thanks to them, we now are fully funded to build the permanent platform. And we will have some exciting news coming up in the next month or so about the permanent home for that platform as well. So again, thank you all for participating today. We're excited to see what history will get researched and preserved. And so I'm gonna just turn this over to our last slide and see what questions and discussion might ensue.
I'm keeping tabs of the comments, lots of fantastic work and exciting.
Yeah.
There are a few questions in there. Do you have recommendation for software outside of the iPhone and PGDA? Lots of high-res scans of design and letters and photos and such. So any other recommendations on any software or platforms that you all have used in your process of creating this platform?
So I don't know if this answers this question, but whatever you need to document any work that you found, we keep saying this over again, but it is really about preservation, not perfection. So when I was doing the earthquakes book, what became important to my research, even if I weren't reproducing images, was knowing what work was made. So that's what we're trying to do, is have a record of work that has been created that might be part of our graphic design history. And again, I want to emphasize that we're deciding collectively what should be part of graphic design history. So any software, tools, whatever you find that's helpful in documenting this work, we encourage you to use.
Right, there's a few comments as well about hoping that faculty will put this as a classroom assignment for the fall. So if any of you are thinking about doing that, kudos. It sounds like this would be a great thing to do for the fall.
So I wanted to, sorry,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead, Ryan. Well, I was just going to say that on our website, we actually have a page of examples of what have been some classroom assignments and activities. We do also add that to the educator's resource. Give me the proper name of that again.
The design teaching website.
Yes. Are you going to add that into our chat? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so that that provides, the resource provides a nice kind of structure to those of you who are educators who use the People's Graphic Design Archive for assignments to share with each other. And so we are actually trying to get people to add to the resource, and then we are adding those to our website. Other questions? I'm not seeing the Q&A, so depending on you, Ryan.
Louise, stop the
Yeah.
share so that you can see the community. It'll be easier.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
I love a chaotic Zoom chat. It's a sign of a good party, I guess.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
There's a couple of
Excellent.
questions about using the archive. All the images are downloadable. So, but what I think might be really helpful for you as an educator is they also link back to the source, which could be helpful if maybe you're only finding a little snapshot on our site. That's what I both love and hate about this project, is the rabbit holing situation that you can really easily get into, where you find something and then you go to the origin and then you think, oh, wow, okay, wonder, what's another way I could look at this? And it can become a really delightful kind of webbed research opportunity. But yes, everything's fully downloadable.
Okay, I think we're catching up on the questions that were in the chat.
Okay.
The main ones just had to do with considering how to incorporate this into a classroom setting and have upload-a-thons. So if y'all are interested, yeah.
We love that. Or tagathons. We love tagathons. When you think about doing a research project, it's those tags that help you to find things. So the richer those tags, the better. And I will say, sometimes that the editors right now may add or change those, but getting your ideas is really significant. I also want to say, because that we're in this living prototype, which can be clunky in terms of adding these tags, when we get that the permanent platform built, we anticipate it'll be a lot easier for the community to not only add information, but those tags.
Megan, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just wondering what you would do with, say, problematic or racist materials, because are you trying to have a inclusive of everything that's been happening in history? And if so, is there a way people can better contextualize that during the upload process?
Yeah, Brockett, do you want to field that one?
Oh my gosh, I'll try. It's tough. I mean, it's really cool. It's a cool conversation actually. And it's a conversation that I wish we could talk about as a community because of course, what I think is problematic, you might not, you know, and I think this kind of goes into this place of speaking about content warnings and trigger warnings. But we feel like right now we're trying to address that through tagging system by tagging things that we feel like might be offensive to certain readers or certain users. And we have talked about some things that we could do technically in our final website rather than the existing living prototype. So we've looked at some things like blurring out the image until one clicks on it, or not providing a high res download, instead providing only a low res. So that content could be accessed, but maybe not distributed or abused. But we haven't been able to implement any of these ideas yet, just because of the technological limitations. What would you add? I mean,
all right, Brockett, you sounds like you have a dog problem there. Yeah, it's been tricky. Right now, we do have a kind of like a window shade on some of the imagery, but we are trying to include all of it, not to be inclusive, but that we, you know, if we are trying to get a picture of history and what representation has looked like, in order to be able to have a conversation about it and understand it, we do have to include everything, but we do not want it celebrated. And that is why we're trying to include only low res copies of it.
Thank you.
Other questions, suggestions?
Well, I had just asked you a bunch of questions about non-Latin archives and if you guys are inviting those and if those are searchable or not, and translations. So definitely got some good answers on there. It seems like the future iterations will be more open to translations and non-Latin information.
Yeah.
And you're inviting everybody to add archives that are non-Latin as well. So
yeah, please.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, the community aspect of this, you know, that we collectively decide what should be part of graphic design history. Right now, the problem for me, for Briar, for Brockett, is that we look like we're the face of it, and we're trying to get, you know, like put bags over our heads, because this really is everybody who's here. It is the whole community that we hope are participating and making these decisions. So, you know, we call ourselves the mother of this People's Graphic Design Archive, but we will put in place structures so that the community is taking it over more and more. So right now we're just, you know, this is a few years underway, but we really do want to not be the archive. The archive is the people's archive.
I think I would just add to that, that part of the archive too is uplifting and a big part of it is to uplift the research of others. So to some extent, I'd be inclined to point to other archives or other repositories rather than duplicate or eclipse that voice in a certain way. So in the case of like translating or repairing typos or something, I mean, I think if there are errors, we want to address that, but the goal rather is to make a community and hopefully point to other resources for designers, because we have a dearth, you know, we don't have sufficient design history resources. And further, the tools that we have aren't going to let us get the histories that we want or collect and talk about the histories that we want until we build new tools. So that's another way to respond to your questions about typos and translations and other archives and things like that.
We have one more question that just came in. If internet memes may have a place on PGDA at some point, they do add image and text and send a message.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We do have a few old school memes that are already in the archive.
Right, we still have 100 participants with us. Do anyone else that's still here with us have any questions? Any thoughts that you want to share before we run out of time?
If I could just add one more thing, I guess, kind of follow up with the panel that we're going to be having in a few days about actually classroom-based activities. If there's any way that the archive could also have a part or maybe a link or a collection of how universities or high schools or even below high schools have used the archive as kind of sample lesson plans and activities, I think it'll make it so much more kind of implementable in classrooms like right away. You know, people can kind of look at a model and learn from that lesson and maybe expand it or customize it to their own context. Of course, that would be great.
Yeah. So again, the teaching resource is where we've been adding our own lessons to. Are you looking for something more, something particular, Puya?
No, I was just suggesting, I'm sure people will be doing amazing things. So just to kind of learn from what others are doing with it.
Absolutely. And again, this is a community. You know, you know, when I had done the book, often people came to me and said, you should include, and now it's we. So, you know, we hope that people will share what the lessons are. We hope to have a place, maybe it's a direct link to the teaching resource, so that information can be shared. So much to do, you know, and you know, what we also hope is that there's all kinds of resources and also a place for conversation. The People's Graphic Design Archive platform is being built by the same people who built the Fonts in Use platform. And as some of you may have used that, know that it's also crowdsourced and that allows for a lot of contribution and community conversation. And so that will be part of our permanent platform.
All right, if y'all don't have at least 72 tabs open on your desktop, you're not doing this conference right. We have many links that were just shared. Design teaching resource is also linked back to all of the other sites that we were just talking about, Fonts in Use. So there are lots of great resources that are being shared in the chat. If you're not familiar with them, please check them out. One other question, also curious about an archive of designers. So you can cross-reference designers' careers or resumes as well as the work they created at that time. If any of you thought about that.
I think that's probably out of our purview. I don't know, Louise and Briar and others, but this is the People's Graphic Design Archive. I think that's something somebody else might do better. I'd love to point to that if that exists. It's totally a viable project, but our archive is kind of, it's messy. And I hope it'll always stay that way in a chaotic way.
But some, you know, one of the other things, and I know Rob Saunders from the Letterform Archive has talked about this, is about how getting designers, including all of you, to archive your own material. So that's a whole process into and of itself. And I want to make clear, there's a lot of designers whose work is worthy of preservation, but the resources that it takes to preserve that physical work make that a huge challenge. And that was one of the drivers of the People's Graphic Design Archive. It's just, I see Melissa nodding her head because she has encountered that herself when she was fortunate to be given a lot of material, but finding a place for it to go is really difficult. And so that material ends up in dumpsters, and a lot of amazing designers or people that should be recognized as designers, their material is just not going to go anywhere but a dumpster, or maybe a couple of pieces will go in a dumpster. So learning how to archive your own work and hopefully adding it to the People's Graphic Design Archive or working with the community to get it added to the People's Graphic Design Archive is a way that we have a record of that work. And that, again, I want to emphasize to everybody, is our emergency. There are a lot of people in your community who made significant contributions to what we should be calling our graphic design history. And if they pass and there is no record of that work and that their stories are not recorded in order so that we understand that work, it's a loss to all of us.
Louise, might I add in a tiny bit?
Please.
As someone who does work for an organization that tries to preserve these histories, often after someone has passed, by the time it comes to us, the families maybe don't know what was important in that collection, or they're not as familiar with what was significant about that work. And so portions, really critical portions of that person's legacy will be just gone. They're like, oh, we thought that was just like photocopies of a thing, so we recycled it. Or like they don't understand the importance of process work. So they're like, oh, well, we just kept the final work. We didn't keep any of the original. So yeah, there's so many different ways that loss happens between a designer having that work and then it being preserved. And one of the things that I'll mention to Sam's point was that this idea of the creator network is really, really interesting. And so something that we really encourage at Letter from Archive, and I know is important to the People's Graphic Design Archive as well, is including contributors, not just the person who might most famously be known for that work,
Yes.
but also the other people who helped make that thing real. So that is part of being able to show the story of that graphic design, the communities that actually built this work, not just the single person whose name is on the studio window, but that network can kind of be seen through tracking the collaborators and not just that main entity. So that's something that might be interesting to you, Sam. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kate.
Diane?
Yeah, in that same vein, I was just thinking maybe it's a landing page, or maybe it's a page in the footer of what to do when you have your real site, maybe, but of how to, where to send in, or how to document, or how you can, because I would think that a lot of people who have kids and their kids maybe aren't into what it is, but they don't necessarily want to throw it away, but like having a page that's specifically for that. So when they're searching, like, what do I do with my dad's graphic design stuff? That might be a good way to just make sure you have 300 words for SEO, you know?
Yeah, no, that's great. And again, as a community, we hope people who have the know-how will contribute that kind of resource, because that's really a significant one. So let's see, I was trying to find my notes in here where I pasted, again, we have an emergency here. A lot of our history is disappearing. Hopefully what we've been able to do here is convince you of this emergency, get you thinking about who might be in your community, who's more advanced in years. And Tony Best told me that the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences thinks of somebody who is more advanced in years, much to my chagrin, as anybody over 60. Hopefully you have some tools now and some skills for how you capture an oral history and how you can capture work, preservation, not perfection, and hopefully you have a sense of how to very easily add that material to the People's Graphic Design Archive.
All right, I think we have made it to the end. We only have about 2 minutes left. So I want to thank all of the panelists and the additional folks that joined the presentation in different capacities. Also, thank you, Alberto, for your help behind the scenes. And I hope all of you had your questions answered. If you did not, we have lots of links that we've shared. I will share them out as well through Slack. So if you do get a chance to check out Slack later, I'll make sure that all the links that were shared in the chat today get shared there as well. Yeah. Enjoy the rest of your
Thank you all. It was great. Yeah, Ryan, thank you.
Thank you.
Alberto. Yeah, thank you all.